One. Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Rebel Finance School for 2024. Welcome. Katie and I are super excited about tonight because we have a special guest with us.
I'm excited.
We both went to a conference called Economy the beginning of the year. It's called The Economy of Me. It's about financial independence. And the speech I was least looking forward to was our speaker for tonight.
Do you think you should be saying this, Alan?
Probably not. But I was the least looking forward to this one because I thought, well, why do I need to even go to a speech about prenups? Why do I need... I've been married to Katie for 11 years. We've been together for nearly 20. Feel like we're past that. But then I watched the talk and I was blown away. I learned so much about relationships, communication, and we immediately looked at each other about 10 minutes into the talk and said, we need Aaron to come on Rebel Finance School. He needs to come on Rebel Finance School and talk to you all. So we are very grateful to have with us tonight Aaron Thomas. He has a huge bunch of accolades, but I'm not going to give all that away because I'm just excited for him to start and tell us what's happening. So please help me welcome Aaron Thomas to the Rebel Finance School. Give him a virtual round of applause. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
We are super excited to have you. So we will hand over to you for the first bit and then call us back when you need us. We will be lurking in the background.
All right, thank you guys a bunch. So, what lessons can be learned from 1,000 divorces? I never set out to be a divorce lawyer. I was practicing criminal law, and the biggest divorce attorney in Atlanta, where I'm from, offered to double my salary to join his firm, where I would get to represent athletes and celebrities, people whose posters were on my wall growing up, musicians whose music I listened to, which it sounds cool. And maybe it should have been obvious in retrospect, but they don't invite the divorce lawyers to the parties. But I jumped at the chance. I knew nothing about divorce going in. My parents still together. They will celebrate 58 years of marriage in next month. Most of my friends weren't even married, even thinking about getting married, much less were they divorced. My sisters hadn't gotten married yet. And here I am thrown into the most life-changing, emotionally charged litigation on issues of child custody, visitation, divvying up people's life savings, divorce. And I had an immediate takeaway that I want to share with you all today. Okay, I think that's it. That's my time, guys. That's my time for today. Hope this has been helpful. No, okay. Look, don't get me wrong. I wasn't against the idea of finding a life partner, having kids, growing old with someone together. I was just terrified of the act of legally getting married. You see, we all get married for love, but there's a contract attached to those wedding vows, an addendum, if you will. That's legalese. I'm fluent. And most of my clients didn't learn the full extent of what being married meant for their finances until they were sitting in my office going through a divorce. And it turns out that marriage is the most important contract you'll ever sign in your life. And almost no one's read it. And if it ends, if this marital contract comes to an end, the effect is devastating on a couple of fronts. There's the divorce, meaning the end of the relationship that you thought would last forever, which is already hard enough. But then there's the divorce case, the lawsuit that gets filed with the court. And it's very easy to end up in a year plus of litigation, all that stress, the impact on kids. And it wasn't unusual in my practice to watch divorcing couples spend 25% of their net worth fighting over who gets the majority of the other 75%. And it was, let's just say it was an eye-opening experience. The point is, a messy divorce is best avoided at pretty much all costs. I don't think that's a controversial statement to make. And look, what's the leading cause of divorce? Marriage. Marriage is responsible for 100% of divorces. A lot of people don't know that. And so I told all of my friends and family and anyone else who would listen, just don't do it. Just don't get married. Throw a big party instead. Hire a DJ. Wear a white dress. Change your last name if that's your thing. But don't actually go through with the vows because you have no idea what you're getting into. As you can imagine, I was very popular with my friends' significant others. And however, I would like to think that I have evolved over the years. I am now happily married to my beautiful wife and the mother of my daughter. And now I think I've got a better recommendation than eternal solitude. And it doesn't matter if you are single right now, if you are a newlywed, if you're engaged to be married, or if you've even been married for 20 years. I think that you will get something from these lessons that I learned from 1,000 divorce cases. Lesson number one, most of the problems that broke apart these marriages were there from the very beginning of the relationship. Common culprit is it's easier to get physically naked with someone than it is to get fiscally naked with someone, right? Out there, I mean, not here, our group, we're on top of our finances, we're transparent, but out there in the real world, it's not unusual for couples to be together years, sometimes decades, and they still don't know the details of each other's finances. And in literally half of the divorces that I did, couples didn't have a full picture of each other's finances when the divorce case started. And this is after sometimes 20 or 30 years of being married to each other. And if couples don't know the details of each other's finances, there's almost no way that they're going to be able to join their financial lives in a way that doesn't lead to resentment. Here's what I would usually see. It was usually one of two things happening. There's either number one, couples combine all of their money into one account because that's what our parents did. But one spouse is more of a spender, the other spouse is more of a saver. And so there are either open arguments about the spending, or there is silent resentment or about the spending, or sometimes a combination of both, right? Or option two, I would see couples keep their finances mostly separate. And in the beginning, this seems to make sense. This kind of 50-50, this roommate sharing of the expenses in a household, but then things change over time. And the disparity in income gets larger, the gap in the couple's standard of living widens, and you look up in a few years and you have two spouses living under the same roof, but in different socioeconomic brackets. And it turns out that doesn't work. You can't go Dutch for life. And these are just two of the very predictable ways that couples would break up over money. Lesson number two, financial marriage, being married from a financial perspective, is tougher than it's ever been before. The average financial marriage today looks completely different than just 1 or 2 generations ago. My parents were married in the 1960s. And back then, the average age of someone getting married for the first time was 21 in the US, it was 21 in the UK, 22 in New Zealand. And the average couple back then likely had one bank account between the two of them. They likely had no credit cards. Those barely even existed at the time. SIPs hadn't been invented. 401ks hadn't been invented. Kiwi savers were a long way off. So the couple had no retirement accounts. They had nothing in their pensions at the time. Student loans weren't anything like they are today, at least in the US. This couple in the 1960s, maybe they had one car between the two of them. Maybe they had no house. They had no business. This couple started their financial lives together from scratch. If they were a business, they would be a startup company in your garage. And you compare that to the average couple getting married today. Now, the average age of spouses in a first marriage is 30 in the US. It's 31 in New Zealand, and a positively ancient 34 in the UK, if you can believe that. And now the average couple getting married for the first time, they have 4 to 5 bank accounts each. They've got 3 to 4 credit cards each. They each may have 1 or 2 retirement accounts. They didn't roll over the first one to the second one. They may have student loans. Those spouses likely have their own cars, maybe some car loans attached to them. One spouse likely has equity in a condo or a house. One spouse either owns a stake in a small business or some stock options or some shares in a large business. And maybe more critical than all of those differences are each spouse has at least a decade of their own financial habits that they have learned that are baked in since they moved out of their parents' house. And so if this couple were a business, they would be a corporate merger in terms of complexity. And nobody here would ever merge their business with another person's business without a very detailed written agreement about how is everything going to work? How are we going to make this fit? But most couples today spend more time researching vendors for their wedding day than they do spending time on what it means to merge their entire financial lives in legal matrimony. And this brings me to lesson number 3. A prenup is the partnership agreement for your marriage. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I can see the eye roll emojis in the chat already. A partnership agreement? I thought a prenup was planning for your divorce before your marriage even starts, right? And I get it. I get it. I used to think the exact same thing before I practiced family law. And what I've learned is that you can't plan for what would be fair in a divorce without first planning what would be fair during your marriage. You see, splitting everything in joint names, 50-50, could be totally fair or totally unfair, depending on what you're doing during the marriage itself. How are we going to set up the bank accounts? Do all of our paychecks go into the joint account, and then we each get to transfer out some personal spending money and allowance? Or do our paychecks go into separate bank accounts first, and then we transfer money in to pay for the joint expenses, transfer money into a joint account? Are we, as a couple, are we 50-50 owners in everything in either of our names? Or do we have certain accounts or assets or debts that are just our own? Are the credit cards considered joint debts or separate? And yes, God forbid, if we don't make it, what would be fair? Any business partnership agreement worth the paper that it's written on is going to say what happens if one partner leaves the business or if things fall apart. They call it a termination clause, right? But it doesn't mean that we're planning for the business to fail. It just says, let's not make it a bigger mess if it does. You just want things to go smoothly, no matter what. And the same thing goes for a prenup. If you're already planning for your financial future, can we just put our expectations out there as to what would be fair in a worst case scenario? Can we just play this out? And if we both say the same thing, we both say what we think is fair and it's the same thing, then great. We can put it in writing and resolve it here and forever and completely take any of these disputes off the table. But if we don't agree on what would be fair, then also great, because it means we've identified that disconnect early and we can find out if we can resolve it or if we can't resolve it, right? Either way, you're better off getting these expectations out on the table at the beginning of your relationship. And this was my big aha moment, is you can plan for divorce without planning to divorce. See, I have car insurance, but it doesn't mean that I go out and drive recklessly because I have car insurance, right? I can go get life insurance, and it doesn't mean that I am going to start base jumping tomorrow. I can get insurance. I can get life insurance. I can get car insurance. I can get home insurance. I still unplug the toaster. And you can get insurance against a messy, expensive divorce and still do everything in your power to make your marriage succeed. Still, I know that there are many of you who you're listening to this and you say, Aaron, I could not get a prenup. Maybe it's the word prenup. I just can't bring myself to hop over that line. And I hate to break it to you, but yeah, you've already got one. If you're married, you've already got a prenup. See, a prenup is just a contract that defines the rules of your financial relationship with your spouse. It defines the financial rules of your marriage and, if necessary, your divorce. You either write your own prenup or you are accepting the default prenup written by your state, your country, your jurisdiction. And if the default prenup required a signature, like if it were like actually on a piece of paper and you had to choose to sign either the default prenup or a prenup that you wrote yourself, you had to actually read it over, everyone would write their own prenup. Why? Because the default prenup gives the ultimate power over your entire life savings to someone else. The default prenup says, if you break this marital contract, the distribution of your entire net worth depends on the moral judgment of a complete stranger, a judge who is randomly assigned to your case. And a common misconception is, we don't need a prenup because everything we have is joint anyway. You see, people assume that if they get divorced, that everything is just split 50-50 automatically. But that's not true in 41 of the 50 US states, in all of the English and Welsh courts. Even New Zealand courts have so many exceptions to the general 50-50 rule. And so the court doesn't have to split your assets down the center. They can split it 60-40 or 70-30 based on the judge's subjective belief as to each spouse's contributions to the marriage. And that's both financial and non-financial contributions. And there's this weird thing in relationships, even in relationships where each spouse is objectively doing half the work. Each spouse is pulling their own weight. Everyone's doing their job. It still feels like you're doing 2/3 of the work, doesn't it? Like even in happy relationships, like I see everything I do in the relationship. My wife, how do I know how the dishes got put away? Really? Right? Where's the evidence here? And so it's very easy to find yourself in one of these situations where each spouse feels like they're getting cheated by just getting half of the assets. So many of my clients over the years just wanted to split everything down the center and walk away. But if you really want a guaranteed 50-50 and the ability to move on with your life, you got to put that in a prenup. That's wild, right? The default prenup also says whatever you bring into the marriage is considered your separate property, and whatever you accumulate during the marriage is your marital property. And so you think, well, if we get divorced, then we each keep our separate property and we split our marital property. Easy peasy, right? But what no one tells you is that your very paycheck is considered marital property. It's marital income. And what do you do after you get that first paycheck after your wedding day? You take a little bit of that paycheck and you put some of it in your checking account that you had before the marriage. You put a little bit of that paycheck in your savings account you had before the marriage. A little bit of it goes into that retirement account you had coming into the relationship. A little bit of it goes to pay down the car note on the car you had coming into the relationship. You pay down the mortgage you had coming into the relationship. And a few years from then, you look up and all of those assets that you had before the marriage are considered commingled in the eyes of the law. And now everything that you had that was your separate property is now up for division. Half of my job as a divorce lawyer over the past 2 decades was having this very conversation with my clients. What do you mean she wants half of my retirement from the retirement account that I had coming into the relationship that I've been the one contributing to from my paycheck? What do you mean he wants half of the house that was in my name the entire time that I had before the marriage even started, that I'm the only one who has paid the mortgage on for the entire relationship? What do you mean he wants half of that? And I have to explain to them that you contributed to it with marital money, and now it's up for division. If you want the protection that is supposed to come with the default prenup of the things that you own before your marriage, you got to put it in your own prenup. In every other financial partnership that we have in life, like a business, we agree on the ownership rules, who owns what, at the beginning of the partnership. The default prenup, the default way of getting married, says you have to agree on who owns what when you hate each other. Guess how that goes? And if you can't agree, pay the lawyers. And that's the unfortunate truth. Couples who don't negotiate their financial relationship when they marry often end up paying the solicitors to negotiate it when they divorce. And it kills me when people say, we can't get a prenup. It's not romantic. I'm sorry. What percentage of marriage do you actually think is romance? You think this is all rose petals and champagne flutes? Have you met a married couple before? And learning how to resolve potentially sticky issues isn't unromantic. It is literally practice for the rest of your married life. And not only that, negotiating your prenup might save your marriage in the first place. Sounds like a stretch? Here's how. We looked at 1,000 divorce cases and we categorized the biggest issues that broke couples up. And then we reverse engineered solutions to those problems and we write them into the prenups. So, very common problem that we have. We talked about it earlier. One spouse is a spender and the other is a saver. And these couples drive each other crazy, especially when all of their spending comes out of one account. And so we love this concept of money buckets. By having couples take all of their household income and fund a joint account that only pays for their joint expenses, and then giving each spouse discretionary money that goes into their separate accounts, we get the best of both worlds. Couples get the benefits of joining their finances and building a financial life together and having transparency about the big things that matter, while keeping the benefits that come with autonomy over our own discretionary spending. My wife can go out to eat every day and use her years-old iPhone, and I can have the latest gadgets every year while I brown bag it for lunch. And we don't drive each other crazy because we don't even see each other's discretionary purchases. We make them from our own separate bank accounts, and we get the same monthly allowance, and we can spend it however we want with the peace of mind of knowing that all the joint bills are paid. Another problem we found is it turns out that couples really don't like it when one spouse makes big purchases or big financial decisions without checking with the other spouse first, without any kind of discussion. And so we love this idea of large expense check-ins. For expenses that are over a certain threshold, you have to discuss those expenses before they are incurred. For some people, it's $250 or $500. For some people, it might be 1,000. Quid, can I say quid? Always wanted to say that. And I even had a professional basketball player say, I don't need to know about any expense under 10 grand. But over 10 grand, he wanted to know. And I know that everyone's got a number. Even that guy making $20 million a year had a number over which he wanted to know before it was spent. We put it in a prenup. Another huge problem, lack of communication when it comes to money. And so we love instituting in households an annual shareholders meeting. So fun fact, for a prenup to be enforceable, and this is everywhere, each spouse has to disclose all of their assets and debts and their income coming into the relationship. And just that one act of transparency alone can work wonders for couples. But we also found that it's not just set it and forget it when it comes to your marital finances, right? And so we love having this idea of an annual shareholders meeting where you come together as a couple and you discuss a predetermined agenda of certain things. Last year's spending, everybody's assets, the income for the household, talk about the budget for the upcoming year. We can talk about retirement contributions. We can revisit things like our subscriptions and our spending. And is anybody actually watching, the Netflix? Can we get rid of the HBO? The insurance, your home insurance, your car insurance, your policies, planning for next year's big expenses. And this way, we make the continued transparency and communication about finances intentional rather than just leaving it up to chance. Couples would often tell me, if we're talking about money, it's because we're in the middle of a fight. Like we were never talking about money unless it's in the context of an argument. And we believe that it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom when talking about money in your relationship. Shared goal funds mean, what do you and your spouse value as a couple? And can we dedicate a portion of your money to that dream? For me and my wife, it's a travel fund. And so we committed to putting 5% of all of our take-home income into a travel fund so that when we want to take a trip, the money is there and it's baked in. We have something that excites us when it comes to talking about money. For you, it might be the baby fund or the RV fund or the can I actually ever retire fund, right? But there's something positive that brings you together when you're talking about money. And I am not so naive as to think that a prenup is going to solve all of your relationship problems. It certainly hasn't for me. But for everything else, we like having the idea of a way to resolve conflict as it comes up. Prime example of this is counseling provisions. Yes, counseling provisions in your prenup. What I saw in my divorce work was that one couple would suggest that one's partner would suggest that the couple go to counseling, usually after a big argument, and the other spouse would take offense to it. Like it was an accusation that something was wrong with them. Say, well, we don't need counseling. You go to counseling. I don't need it. And then when spouse number two would come around to the idea of counseling, spouse number one had given up on the idea of counseling or often the relationship itself. And we wanted to create a situation where you have an opportunity to resolve problems before the relationship is on death's door. And so what couples like to do is include a rule that says either spouse can trigger 3 or 4 counseling sessions every year of the relationship. And you're agreeing ahead of time that if either spouse wants it, you're going to counseling. You don't have to wait until the relationship is at a 2 out of 10 or to be on death's door to get a relationship tune-up. And our termination clause in our agreement, in our partnership agreement. So we split everything that we have in joint names 50-50, which is most of our assets, and we keep any other accounts or debts in our individual names. And this termination clause might be the most romantic part of the prenup for me, because what it says is, even if we get to a point where I can't stand you, I'm willing to be legally committed to being fair. A prenup done right can be the tool that gives you and your partner the best chance of staying married, while also making sure you don't go broke if you don't. We are here at Rebel Finance School. We're talking about being intentional about everything financial. Your income, right? Our spending, our saving, our investing. Let's be just as intentional about the relationship that makes it all possible. Thank you.
It's that classic sentence Katie says to me, "You're on mute, Alan." Please give Aaron a huge round of applause. Aaron, that was absolutely fantastic. We loved it. And it's a really interesting, different way to look at prenups and how it works. And I think the piece you said at the end was that the termination clause can be the most romantic bit. When you first said that, when we were in economy, I leant in and go, God, he's got to be good to work this one out. Like, I don't see this coming. And actually, we have seen so many people come on our course where one partner has taken advantage, left with a lot of things. We even had a comment in the chat about someone had to basically just to get out of the marriage, had to like, I'm just going to sign everything over to you and move on because I need to get out for my sanity. Like, it's incredible how this stuff can damage relationships, and you have a huge amount of love. I'm looking up because we have a giant screen here and I see rounds of applause coming in for your presentation.
Yeah, I thought your humor is excellent, Aaron. I particularly like the bit when you said, oh, prenups, that's not very romantic, is it? How much of your relationship in general is romantic? And I'm looking at Alan thinking, yes, perhaps we can up our romance in the marriage.
Oh, come on. We watched a romantic comedy last night.
That's true. Anyway, it's not about us. It's not about us.
It's not 100%. It's not 100%, I think.
It's definitely not 100%. I can definitely up my game, and I think I've taken that away. And we are very appreciative of the work you did to look up the stats for the UK, for New Zealand, because we know you're based in the US. So the work you've done to prepare this, we are so appreciative of that. Thank you. Should we get into the questions, Katie?
Yes. So Vidya had a couple of questions. Vidya said, they're in the UK. Can you change the terms of the marriage contract? I don't know if you know this because obviously you're not based in the UK.
And if you don't know it,
Yeah.
feel free to speak generally about the US or different bits, and then we can figure it out. And it at least gives us the clue of what to Google to
Yes.
find out.
Where to start?
Yes, yes. Yeah, so everything that I say, take it with a grain of salt that I'm licensed in the United States and not these other places. Here in the US, yeah, it's called a postnup. You can determine, the rules of your financial relationship after you're married and include pretty much all of the same kinds of things. My best guess is that there is some kind of analog. Now, I know that UK has trailed the US in terms of, the enforceability of these agreements. But generally, the rules now, as of today, apply pretty much the same. As long as these agreements are fair, both parties had opportunity to speak with counsel, and it's not under duress. There's no fraud. There's the disclosure of assets and debts. Then these agreements are upheld, and all across the world, governments are giving couples the power to define their own marital contract rather than forcing everyone to accept the default.
I love that. And it isn't quite interesting. One of the things that comes up is like, how do you even start this conversation? And we ran a thing about working together with your family, your partner, last week on Rebel Finance School. And one of the comments that came in was like, I've tried to talk to my husband, but my husband now that thinks like, now I want to talk about money, I've changed and it's unattractive, was the direct comment. Like, how do you even start these conversations? How do you know how to deal with a resistant human being at the other end? Because we come across a lot of resistant human beings to this topic. So I'd love to know if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing I say, I'm sure is going to be 100%, but this is what has worked for a lot of my clients is in a weird sort of way, if you want a prenup, don't lead with the word prenup. I think that we can all concede that prenups have a stigma attached to them. They have a negative reputation. I'm a lawyer. And before I got deep into this work, I thought the same thing. I thought that these were for celebrities and super wealthy people and people who are planning on getting divorced before their marriage even started. And so what I found is it's much more helpful to talk about the elements of what you want to accomplish, right? So like, do you think that it would be a good idea for us to be transparent about our finances, about what we have in terms of assets and debts and income at the beginning of our relationship? Would that be a helpful thing for our relationship? Do you agree in like having regular meetings, whether that's quarterly or semi-annually or on an annual basis, to talk about our budgeting? Is like, pulling teeth as that might feel, would that be a good idea? Would that be a healthy thing for us to do in our relationship? Should we talk about, like this credit card that I have coming into the marriage? Do we consider that a joint debt? Do we consider that, like a separate debt? What's mine? What's yours? What's ours? Can we get on the same page and make sure that we're on the same page on all of these types of things? Can we have rules about like when we're going to go talk to a counselor, or how we're going to resolve difficulties? Do we consider both of our retirement accounts joint? Do we consider them separate? Would it be a good idea for us to know this, before we spend the next 40 years together? And then I think that when you can, reach some kind of agreement on all of those things, then it's a much easier transition to say, well, I heard this guy, the semi-handsome guy named Aaron, who talked about, we can put this into a document and and solidify this and make this our own agreement rather than accepting, the default agreement. Let somebody in a row decide, what the terms of our personal relationship, what our marriage is. And I think that kind of bringing it together at the end is a much healthier way than just dropping, I mean, if my wife came and said, we need to do our post-up, I would probably raise an eyebrow just the same, as rather than talking about the underlying issues that want to be addressed.
I love that. That's excellent advice. Leading on from that, who was it asked? Sarah said, can people have prenups if they're not married? So, if you're in a relationship, probably living together, is that possible? Is that called something else? Like, how does it work if you're not married but in a relationship?
Yeah. In many jurisdictions, you can. Here, we call it a cohabitation agreement. And I think it's called something similar in many European countries. I'm sure there are analogs in other areas. And you can cover pretty much all the same types of things in these agreements that you can in a prenup. Most people, at a minimum, are going to do, something like a cohabitation agreement when they're living together, when they're buying a piece of property together. And they will commonly address things like, not just the payment of the rent or the mortgage or the bills, but if the relationship comes to an end, how do you get out of this joint, house? Maybe you're on a lease together, maybe you're on a mortgage together. And so they'll write in, clauses about how to figure out each spouse's equity or each partner's equity in the property, how long you have to vacate the residence, even going so far as like how much of the utilities, how much of the light bill do you pay, if you move out in the middle of the month, just to take all of the disputes that you may not be as well positioned to do when you're in the middle of a breakup, and go ahead and front load those decisions so they don't become messy later on.
Yes, yeah, the whole exiting houses can be one of the biggest issues. I guess I'm talking from my experience. I should ask you, are houses one of the biggest issues, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, houses are, pretty much any other houses. And I would also say I would put businesses actually above that. Houses are things that are not always liquid, and people are not super excited, especially right now here in the US, to get rid of their low interest rate on their mortgage and go out into today's market and have a much higher interest rate. And so, having a plan in place as to how those things are going to be addressed in a fair way, certainly a good idea. Businesses, I think, can be even more of a landmine because, with every other asset that can be owned by somebody, there's a reasonable, reliable way to come up with a value for it, right? A bank account is worth whatever's in the bank account. Like a retirement account is worth whatever's in the retirement account minus like the taxes you're gonna have to pay when you take that money out. A car, you can like get an estimate online. You get an appraiser to value your house. But a business is one of those assets that I've seen really destroy people's lives in the midst of a breakup, because one person can go get an expert to say this business is it's worth nothing. I'm the owner of it. I can't sell it to anybody else. I'm the one who runs it. I do all the work. It's not worth anything. And the other expert says, we're going to look at the last 12 months trailing revenue and use a multiple of 5.6, and your business is worth $1 million. Yes, your business that has 15 grand in the bank account, you owe $500,000 to your spouse for it. And it is not unusual to see business owners have to sell the business, close down the business, file for bankruptcy in the midst of a divorce. And, I'm sure everyone here has a friend or a family member who has a horror story of the financial devastation that happened in the midst of their divorce. And so these kinds of issues, these kinds of stories are they're the rule, not the exception. And so yeah, all the way down the line, there can be issues when you're talking about joining every financial asset you have.
Yes, yeah, the horror story bit. That's probably why I run the courses I run, is because of what happened to my parents and money and finances. And it's amazing how those things can affect your beliefs, your energy, and then actually set you on a different path completely. So this is super valuable. We're very excited about this. So we did have a question like what's the difference between a prenup and a postnup? Like what's the difference between the two?
The big difference between a prenup and a postnup is that a postnup is signed after the date of the wedding and a prenup is signed before the date of the wedding. There are other small differences in different jurisdictions You know, for example, in California, once you're married, you are deemed to have a fiduciary responsibility to your spouse. And so there is a higher standard of fairness that the agreement must carry for it to be enforced down the road. But in general, you can address the same types of issues in a prenup and a postnup.
Okay, cool. So it's a fairly simple, just like this is something we're installing afterwards. This is something we're installing before.
That's exactly right.
Cool.
I got one. Vidya had a really interesting question around like kind of the scope of this. So she was saying, can you decide like the home logistics, meaning the housework, like dividing up the responsibilities in the home of who does what, percentage of time that each partner looks after the kids? Like, does that sort of thing get covered, or does it tend to be more strictly kind of financial things?
Well, it's really interesting because Antonix at YouTube put historically women did worse in divorce when they earned less due to maternity and had lower pension provisions. And this is the whole thing of like the homework, not homework like from school, but the housework. Like, I don't know how to say it without sounding like I'm from the 1950s. But that
still called
this
housework.
Balance of the relationship that actually like was the thing I hated, with my mum giving and my dad giving my mum housekeeping money and how that affected their relationship. Anyway, Aaron, tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, so I would say we typically don't get as granular as, you know, percentage of unpaid labor done on the home front that couples will do, because I think that these are things that fluctuate, and we wanted to, you know, usually you want to write your prenup or your postnup and do it once and not come back. But I certainly, couples will put that in their annual shareholders meeting in terms of like the list of things to revisit. And so I think it's more important that you have an opportunity to come back and address these things. You know, what share are you doing? You know, can you help out with picking up the kids and cleaning up around the house and all these other things? There's actually a great book called Fair Play, written by one of my law school classmates, actually. Eve Brodsky wrote this book called Fair Play that's all about evening out the domestic labor that happens on the home front, which is traditionally done mostly by women. It is unpaid, and you know, the mental load that is often carried by women in households that can often be devalued by their spouses when it comes time to split up the assets. They even have the Fair Play Institute even has a deck of playing cards where it has like all the different like duties that are done in a traditional household, and you kind of like lay them out on the table and you see who does what. And, you know, if you're holding a bunch of cards, then, you know, you may have some evidence that you're doing 2/3 of the work in your relationship. And it can be time to either, you know, at least give more attention and value to that unpaid labor that happens in our houses, or try to shift some things around, or even, you know, people will write in alimony provisions for, you know, these spouses who are allowing their careers to take a back seat to, you know, having their careers go on the back burner so that they can do work that is important for the household, raising children, homemaking work, and making sure that you're compensated. Because if you've been out of the workforce for a few years, or if your career's been on the back burner, the relationship comes to an end, you're now all of a sudden in a more financially vulnerable spot, and you can't easily just jump out there into the workforce and make the same kind of money as if you had worked consistently, you know, at 100% pace throughout the relationship. And so that's something I talk about more in my book. And I think if I can do a little, you know, plug there for it, the prenup prescription there behind me. Yeah, I mean, I think that while we may not write all of those kind of duties into an agreement, these are things that should certainly be discussed as part of the overall picture of what are we agreeing to by getting married.
That's a fantastic answer. And yes, you can do definitely more of a plug for your book. Can you give us the title again?
Yes, the title of the book is The Prenup Prescription: Meet the Premarital Contract Designed to Save Your Marriage.
I love it. Fantastic.
Amazon is easy. Yeah.
Yes. It's fantastic. Because that actually brings me to a question, which was from Harriet. Is there a standard cost for a prenup? How much does it cost on average? Is it dependent on how many assets you have? Yeah, and it sounds like a book to start reading is a lot cheaper than a lawyer to write a prenup as well. But like, how does that all work, Aaron?
Yeah, that is correct. My office does them for a flat fee of 3,500. That's here in the US. We're, all over the United States. I think that is probably somewhere in the range that you could be looking at to have one drawn up. But I will 100% admit that, a lot of the principles that we're talking about don't require you to hire a lawyer or get a document to start these kinds of conversations in your own houses, in your own relationships. Um, Access to finances, being intentional about your finances, getting on the same page about what's mine, yours, and ours. Certainly, if you want it to be legally enforceable, then you're going to need to go, that additional step. But it is my hope by having these conversations that if it does nothing else but cause someone here to go and have a conversation with their partner that leads to, a more healthy financial relationship in their household, then my mission is achieved.
I love that. And that's exactly what we want is if you're listening to this right now, there is a lot of people on YouTube and in the Zoom. Please have a chat with your partner. The whole point of this is to actually do things about this. I keep looking at Derek as well, who's getting married in a couple of months. Derek, I hope this has given you thoughts. Put your comments in the chat.
I think as well, a few people have said that, they've got kids. They've been in a relationship for a long time, but their kids are, late teens, early 20s, getting into serious relationships. And they are excited to be able to share this with them and say, look, think about these things. And, even if you're single as well, next time you start to get into a serious relationship, having this front or back of mind to have those conversations, to have a smooth relationship before, during, and afterwards as well.
And we did have Catherine on YouTube says, wow, this has blown my mind in the best way. Thank you. So you're getting some wonderful comments and helping us this. F says, I don't know if you know this, you might not, but you might be able to point us in the right direction. What's the default asset split in Scotland for couples? Like, you might be able to tell us just what to Google to find that or how to find it.
Yeah, I do not know offhand, but I would, what I would do is probably the same thing you do, which is search property division laws Scotland and see what pops up there. I will say in the research that I've done leading up to today and otherwise, most most jurisdictions have rules that give the judge or arbiter a lot of leeway in deciding what would be fair rather than mandating, a 50-50 split of assets. And certainly that is because there are situations where it wouldn't be fair, right? If one spouse runs up a ton of debt, credit cards, pulls out a HELOC on, the property without the knowledge of their spouse, those types of things, then it wouldn't be fair just to split all of the assets and debts 50-50. So courts want to leave leeway to account for those unfair situations. And the unfortunate byproduct of that is there's a way to argue, about anything. And that's what causes, these prolonged divorce cases that cost a lot of money where both spouses feel like they're being cheated. And, to me, the only resolution for it is getting on the same page about these things at the beginning. The three principles that I think a prenup should be based on, I think are also the same three principles that are key to a healthy marriage, which is transparency, communication, and fairness. Those may not come off as like strictly legal terms. I didn't learn those in law school, but I think that is like that's the only resolution that I think helps keep people out of courtrooms, litigating divorces.
Which I think is what I actually love about your content is it's about having a good relationship. And then if you have a good relationship based on those three things and you're talking well, you're communicating well, you're transparent with what you've got, what you're working on, then none of this should actually become an issue. And I love your, let's think about this up front so that we don't have any of those issues in the past. Is there a way you found to help people have those conversations around transparency, communication? How do we actually get people talking?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. I think that probably similar to having conversations about just finances and like the scripts that we have in our own minds is talking about, what was your relationship to money growing up? What did you witness in your household growing up? Some of the comments that I've seen in the chat as well are talking about how much dad owes mom for all the unpaid labor that happened in their households growing up. And just kind of like identifying these things. And, I may have different expectations because of the way that my household, came up. In my household, my mom controlled the checkbook, even though, my dad was the one working. And then after years, my mom ended up being the one earning more money. And I think, that gave me a certain perspective. And I learned different lessons about money growing up than, you date somebody else who money was always scarce in their household. And maybe one parent kind of controlled the money over the other parent. And the other parent had to come and ask permission for money. And that has been normalized and internalized in that person. And so discussing kind of, what your memories are, how you view what is a fair, financial relationship. Should everything be 50-50? Should we have our own spending money? Does money flow into a joint account, or does all the money go in there and then it flows out of the joint account? Just having those kinds of discussions, I think, can be revealing, and then just see where they go from there. When I was saying disclosing what you have in terms of assets and debts, it tells a story. It may not be the whole story. It has to be a no judgment zone, right? Like, we're just going to put this out on the table, but we can't, this is just where we are. And then what we're going to talk about is, how did we get to this space? Like, am I paying off my credit cards every month, or am I collecting a balance? And like, how did I get in the habit? And like, again, no judgment, but this is where I are. And then what do we want to be the practice for our household as a couple moving forward? Are we going to be maxing out our retirement vehicles? Are we going to be keeping our debt at a minimum balance, at a zero balance on high interest debt? Or are we cutting up the credit cards altogether because we don't trust ourselves with them, at all? And all of those things, every kind of thing that you can come to an agreement on prevents like 10, 20 arguments down the line. So all of this is why I'm so passionate. I mean, it came from really, I started prenups.com when I was getting married myself. I wanted to stay married myself. It came from a selfish place. I just didn't want my marriage to end up in divorce. And my wife is also a lawyer. And so we always joke, like, if our divorce goes to court, we're going to be like trying our divorce in front of our coworkers, because like we all, we know all the people in the courtroom. And so we've got to do everything we possibly can to prevent, us from turning into, one of my clients.
It's fascinating.
So you said, have that conversation with your partner up front, agree all these things. Have you had experience, Aaron, of people that their partner doesn't even want to have the conversation, and how you can start that conversation if they're reluctant, if it's just a, no, I don't want to talk about it? What have you seen that's worked for people where that happens?
I would probably recommend that you go first. The other person may not be willing to disclose where they are. Finances they're such a personal thing. It's so taboo to even bring it up, which is why I just love the mission that you guys are on, and getting out here, and we're talking about it openly, and we're all showing our faces, and we're not embarrassed to talk about it. And just saying, this is where I am, and I'm not perfect in my financial life, but this is, these are the mistakes that I've made, and here's where I've gotten. And then hope that the other person will feel that they have the permission to expose where they are financially. And it doesn't have to all happen at once, too. I mean, it's kind of wild to think about, we have this expectation that like we live our separate autonomous financial lives, from the time that we graduate high school until, years in the future, when we get married or enter relationships. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to throw that all together in one bucket and it works smoothly. Me and my wife, we had a joint bank account years before we combined the Netflix accounts. Like that was a step too far for us. And so I think it happened in baby steps where, you have one bank account and the only thing that comes out of it is the grocery bill. And then you can like slowly ease into, having more and more things be jointly financial, rather than, one day you flip a switch and every financial decision requires the approval of both people. I mean, it's no wonder It's no wonder that like fighting about money is like one of the number one things that breaks apart relationships. We put like expectations on. It was different when you're going from like 18-year-old and I'm like getting, some money from my parents to like now I guess we have a joint bank account. Now we have like this interim period where we have our individual lives. You can't just expect people to give up all of their autonomy, on the day that somebody says I do. So I would also say, if you're the person trying to get your spouse or your partner to talk about it, to give them a little grace, and know that like it's going to take some time to get on the same page. Like, don't have the expectation that this is an easy afternoon.
Yeah, we've been working at it for decades. It takes time to get on the same page, and even when you have, it's like we were on the same page, and then like things happen, beliefs happen, and then you keep having to come back. So even if you figured it out, it will come back. It is fascinating. I had two questions that sort of tied together. Antonix on YouTube said, is there a way to manage this other than just trust your partner to do the right thing? And it kind of ties into what Elisa said, which is, I guess the question is, how does everything get enforced without having to get a lawyer? I guess it shouldn't be an issue as long as the marriage is in a positive place, but just curious. Yeah, like how do we manage that? Well, how does that work?
Yeah, I think that, so much of it is, and the enforcement question is totally a fair question, right? If we have a rule about, going to counseling and you don't show up for the counseling session, like, am I really going to drag you into a courtroom and ask the judge to force you to sit down, for the marriage counseling session? No. But what I found is that there's so much power in, one, putting something in writing that you can come back and refer to, and two, about like voicing your expectations, on the front end. One thing I like to say is that 99.99% of contracts follow the terms of that contract without either person or either side of the agreement ever having to threaten to go to court, much less actually take someone to court. Like if you have a rental unit that you're renting out and there's like a $50 late fee, is it really going to be worth the money to take that person to court to get that late fee? No, but 99% of the late fees are just paid because we have an expectation. That's how our whole society works, is like, working with the expectations, especially when we put them down on paper. We want to live up to our own word when we say that we're going to do something, particularly when we put something in writing and we sign, a piece of paper on it. Like if you didn't want to do it, are you going to sign a piece of paper saying you're going to do, X, Y, Z, just because like it's not enforceable? No, we're not going to put our signature. We're not going to put our name on something. And so, a lot of it is self-enforcing and having a plan in place. It's one thing to say, after the fact, that expense that you made out of the joint account was completely unreasonable. Why did you spend $1,000 on this thing that we don't need? And it's another thing to say, hey, we've got a rule in place that says anything over $300 we talk about. That's what we agreed to ahead of time. And what I've seen in my work is someone's upset with their spouse's spending or their lack of transparency. And it wasn't that they were good spenders and transparent at the beginning of the relationship and then things went off. It started off that way. They were never transparent. They never had an idea of their partner's income or debts or anything. And the issues just compound the longer that you live together. And so, even though I'm a lawyer and I'm writing these agreements with the intention that they be enforceable in a courtroom down the line, sometimes, put the enforceability to the side and think about like what is going to help create a positive relationship? What gives us the best chance of success? And a lot of that is clear communication of expectations and implementing a way to resolve difficulties when they come up, like counseling, the annual meetings, the quarterly meetings, those types of things.
Vanya said, if one of the partners is not educated enough in financial matters, may the other take advantage in a prenup?
This is why it's so important for both spouses, particularly if you are the one that is not the super financially savvy one in a relationship, to get counsel, to have somebody walk you through the agreement. It is well worth paying a lawyer or solicitor 1 hour's worth of their time when you're talking about a financial relationship that is supposed to last the rest of your life. I know it's easy to say that's, a few $100 I don't want to spend, but have somebody look at the agreement, talk about it from your point of view, talk about what your fears are. What are you concerned about in the relationship? Are you concerned about being financially vulnerable? Does your spouse make more than you do? Is your relationship set up to where you're going to be doing the majority of the labor on the home front? And what kind of anxiety does that give you for the future? And let that professional give you the advice based on what they've seen, from their hopefully years and years of experience, so that you don't get. I mean, the answer is yes. Yeah, you can be taken advantage of in an agreement. You can be taken advantage of without a prenup in place as well. And so, either way, I think, get the help of somebody who has seen these kinds of things before, and let them advise you on how you can best protect your interests.
I love that. And I would love to stare at everyone on this call and on Rebel Finance School and tell them, you need to learn about money yourselves. Like, you need to understand your pension, your 401k, your KiwiSaver. You need to understand your money, where your investments are. The best protection about ever being taken advantage of is education and understanding what's happening. And the more you understand, the more you'll be protected. And I think I am super passionate about this because I saw my mum hand over all of the financial responsibilities to my dad. And then he went bankrupt for £3.6 million and completely screwed the pooch with the family home, with everything. And it is your responsibility to know this. Don't hand over the responsibility to someone else and go, oh, one partner looks after the finances. No, you both need to understand it and make decisions together. And everyone on this call, I'm looking at you. It is your responsibility to learn, and then to help the other person learn too. We have to do that. We have to do that. It's the best protection ever. Okay, I'm off my high horse, Katie. Save us.
So Antonix sort of was rephrasing their question. They're saying, what happens if one of us dies? There's a history in some families where the divorcees have remarried and left money in a way that wasn't intended. Like, how can you make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so I think that that would be an area where an estate planning attorney can be of a lot of help. A lot of people will use a prenup to decide basically what's mine, yours, and ours. And then your estate plan, your will, your trust documents, that determines of what's considered mine, and the 50% of ours, what happens to that. And you can get really creative in writing out your intentions for money. Particularly, I'm sure there are similar kind of trusts in other locations besides the US, where you can kind of dictate what you want to happen to your assets in the event of your death, so that they can be used for specific purposes rather than it's just 100% up to your spouse.
Fantastic. We had a question from Beverly. Does Aaron have social media giving guidance in short clips? I feel like she wants to share your message.
I do. I'm Prenup Guy on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. So please feel free to follow me there. Definitely give out. We try to break this up into little bite-sized chunks. I know it can be overwhelming to get it all at once.
Yeah, it's a big subject with a lot of different questions. And then we did have another comment about what I said about financial education. Liliana said, I totally agree with you, Alan. Unfortunately, not everyone is willing to do that, which I think do that means to learn and to do that stuff. And I think I would say to everyone on the call, if you're not willing to learn, then you just have to accept someone else might take advantage of you in the future. That's the risk you're allowing in. So either learn about finance and let go of, I can't learn, I can't do this, whatever it is, and learn, or accept the fact that you're leaving your financial future in someone else's hands, which, spoiler alert for next week, we're starting the investing and the sexy stuff, which is all about where do you invest your money? And if you're leaving your financial future to a wealth management company, they may or may not have your best interests at heart. So you need to do the education, understand it. Otherwise, it can really kill your financial future. Cool. Let's come back. Graham says, I don't think there's an answer to this one, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think it's interesting. Graham says, what have you found is the best balance? Everything together, split finances or together? We have our own free money. Like, what's the best balance for a couple? Is there best practice for this?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from, the hundreds of clients that I've worked with, as well as my own personal experience. And that is, I think that where culture is today, where, society is today, that it is a healthy thing for everyone to have a little bit of their own spending money that they can do what they want with without oversight. In my view, that has prevented more arguments than it's caused. One policy we have in my household is that it's not what you spend your money on, it's how much you spend your money on. And so when my wife and I agreed that we're each getting the same allowance every month that gets transferred from our joint account out into our separate accounts, that's the end of the discussion there. And I don't have to have the exact same spending patterns as my wife, or agree on, whether I brown bag it or whether I use that money on video games, because we've created that division. I think that also keeping all of your finances completely separate is super, super challenging as well, and can lead to very unfair situations in a household. So I think that joint expenses should be paid from a joint account that both parties have access to, both parties have visibility, they both can take ownership, rather than just kind of like leaving it up. I think it's totally fine for there to be a CFO of the relationship. But as I remind my clients, the CFO doesn't dictate what happens to the finances. They compile the information and report back. They have a duty, a responsibility to the shareholders of the company. They don't control the money. They inform the shareholders about what's happening with the money. And I think that the same thing can apply to a relationship. It's okay for one person to stay on top of the bills more, or the person who does spreadsheets for fun in their spare time, that's okay. But there we go. I think that, the healthiest situation is like everybody has a little bit of money that they can do with what they want, and then they have visibility to the money and the financial decisions that impact the couple.
Fantastic answer. Aaron, you are incredible. April says, will this episode be a standalone episode? I'd love to pass this video along as needed. I can think of a few friends already. So yes, everyone will get the YouTube link to this. You can share it with as many people as you like. We really want to spread Aaron's message because we think it's so important for us to all get on the same page with money. And we want to avoid the terrible situations that come up with money that we all know about. And if we can avoid this, help our kids avoid it, help different people avoid it, it's such a powerful message. So please do share it. That's very important. You can find Aaron's book. We've put the link in the chat. We'll send it out in the email. You can find him on social media, the Prenup Guy, which I think is fantastic. So you can find that there and share some bite-sized stuff. Aaron, you have been phenomenal. We've loved having you here. Is there a closing message to everyone? I feel like Vidya has just done one of them, which is she's just said book ordered. Thank you. So people are buying your book. But is there a closing message you would share with everyone, a rallying call, a command? If you were to command us as the legions of Rebel Finance School, what would you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I spent the last 20 years in divorce court, so you don't have to. I'd say I hope that you take, the principles of transparency and communication, fairness about your finances into your household. I think it's one of the best investments you could ever do.
That's a fantastic closing message. Katie and I got all of your questions that you put in the forms and different things. We're actually planning some separate YouTube videos answering all of the questions you sent us, and we got cut off in last week's Q&A as well. So we're going to be doing those. Ruth, the Happy Saver from New Zealand, says, such a useful episode, no matter where in the world you reside. So thank you. And I would echo that. Aaron, you have been a legend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. It's been great.
That's awesome. Closing messages for everyone from Katie and I. Monday is the sexy stuff. So Monday, we will be diving straight into investing. What is stocks and shares, property? How do we organize our money? All of those different elements. We're super excited to have that for you there.
I want to know if you've got your outfit ready, Alan.
Oh, definitely. I'm wearing my sexy outfit for Monday. It's going to be huge. Tune in for that. Also, Katie has just redone the numbers. If we'd have stayed with the financial advisor that Katie found right in the early days, how would that have affected our finances?
Oh, you're doing a little cliffhanger there.
Well, it is a cliffhanger because, yeah, I just want to tell everyone, but it's incredible, like the difference it would have made. Please tune in Monday. Monday's course could be worth 100,000s for you. It's insane how much this affects your personal finances.
I think the key thing as well to remember is that we talked about the steps to being ready to invest. So, do you have your emergency fund? Have you paid off your high interest rate debt? And then do you have a fuller emergency fund to then be ready to invest? However, you probably are already investing, whether you like it or not. If you have a 401k, a pension with a current or former employer, you are investing your money. Do you know where it's going? Do you understand how to invest and how to optimize what's going on with those? So even if you think that you are not ready for that in terms of the steps that you have to go through, please still come to Monday and the following weeks, because it's so key to understand this stuff.
Yes, the employer has probably bunged you in a 401k standard pension, and they've just bunged you in. And it's quite interesting. The biggest provider of pensions in the UK at the moment is Nest. They have over 8 million customers. Do you know what percentage just accept the default fund? It's crazy. Frida says 75%. Gary says 99. It is 99% of people just accept the default fund, which is just madness because it is normally the worst one for you financially. So let's tackle that on Monday and get going with that. So we're going to say goodbye to everyone on YouTube. YouTubers, thank you so much. Tony, thank you asking everyone to hit like on the video because I always forget that. Please hit like and subscribe. It helps us massively. YouTubers, we love you. Thank you for attending. Goodbye. Okay, so we have ended that.